Welcome to Overwatch League Network's Sigma Deep Dive video. I'm your host, Spyder, and I'll be here to help you play Sigma to your best potential. Since Sigma has been live for a few weeks, I'm sure you know the basics by now. But if you need a refresher, be sure to check out our Sigma in under 4 minutes video. So let's dig into Sigma a little more. He's a high damage tank who slots in well in most situations, but excels as an off tank a little more than a main tank. However, of all the off tanks, he can slot into the main tank role much easier than, say, Diva or Roadhog. Knowing when to play him is one of the bigger lessons you can learn. While versatile, you do need to know your counters. Specifically right now, Symmetra, Mei, Doomfist, and Sombra all tend to give you a little bit of problem. A little later, we'll go into what you can do to help yourself during these matchups, but for now, let's talk about some general ability usage. First up, let's talk about Sigma's primary fire, Hyperspheres. There's a good amount of learning curve with these, but once you get it down and take these tips into account, you'll be slamming your space balls into people's faces and wrecking them. When using your Hyperspheres, remember that they do a small amount of area damage, so use this to your advantage by bouncing it off the map geometry to get around otherwise impassable obstacles. Make sure to practice leading your shots. Like Mei and Pharah, this is one of the biggest learning curves of his kit. Hitting directs is going to be key to doing well as Sigma. Finally, learn the range sweet spot for the primary fire. You can use this as guaranteed damage over an Orisa or Reinhardt barrier, adding extra damage without having to break the shield. Next up, we have the experimental barrier, the shield and Sigma's shield tankiness. Make sure you practice deploying and calling back your shield often. Sigma doesn't want to leave his barrier out for long, and it's usually best served moving it around to counteract the current highest threat to your team. Practice shield dancing. If Sigma's your first shield tank, look up videos on how to do this. This is vastly important to some of his matchups later on. Keep an eye out so you can use your shield to block important cooldowns, such as Ana Nade, Sombra Hack, or heck, even Earth Shatter or Rocket Barrage. It's a low-cost way to expend resources out of the enemy team. Next up, we have Accretion, or as I'm going to refer to it from here on out, Rock, because it's way easier. Be looking out to use Rock to cancel enemy abilities and ultimates, such as Roadhog's heal, Moira's ultimate, Doomfist and Hammond's movement abilities. It sounds simple in theory, but it's not, so keep an eye out for them. Rock plus landing directs from your primary fire is enough to outright kill any hero with 200 HP or less. Use it to delete those pesky flankers or, an out of position McCree. Finally, neither Diva nor Genji can stop Rock, so exploit this when you see Deflect and Matrix come up. Next up, we have Sigma's personal defensive cooldown, Kinetic Grasp, or I'll call it Absorb from now on. Be a little greedy with Absorb. Use it more as like a personal cooldown or a Zarya self shield rather than a way of blocking damage. This will keep you in the fight longer. While it's possible to eat enemy ultimates like Grav and Blizzard, it's quite hard, and Absorb has quite a long cooldown, so you're better off using it for more reliable things, at least until you get the hang of it. And finally, the big one when using Absorb, and it's in the basic guide too, but I think it bears repeating. If you don't let Absorb finish, you do not get the shield, so watch out for stun and CC cooldowns before you use it. Keeping pace, let's move on to Sigma's ultimate, Gravitic Flux. We all know about the Sig 9 at this point, and yes, you can use your ultimate to pull enemies off of the objective to win in overtime. When using your ultimate, watch for stuns during the initial cast. Once you click the primary fire button to confirm the ultimate, it really doesn't matter what happens to you as the lift and damage will happen regardless. When enemies are in the air, aim to soften them up. Don't try to outright kill them. Hitting a healer with the primary fire and then slamming them down will result in a kill. You can then land another primary fire on another low health hero for 2 quick kills. This works with your teammates too. Even Mercy can get in on the action. Alright. Now you know some tricks to using his ability. But let's talk about the fun stuff. Let's talk about when to play Sigma and how to play him with and against certain heroes. As I said, you can play Sigma with almost any other tank, but currently he pairs best with an Orisa as an off tank, or Zarya as a main tank if you're feeling a little frisky. The primary pairing of Orisa Sigma is the double barrier comp, which is what we're going to focus on here because that's basically been the most prevalent. But I'll give you some tips for the other tanks afterwards. So, the double barrier comp. If you played competitive beta at all, or watched the Overwatch League play-in tournament, you'll be very familiar with this comp. It revolves around Orisa placing a barrier and then Sigma backing up that barrier when it's about to break. From there, Orisa moves forward if ground is needed or holds position, placing a new barrier. Pretty simple, it's in the name, right? Double barrier. Sigma recalls his and lets it charge at this point. If done right, you'll have near infinite amounts of shield in front of you in most circumstances. This setup works with and against most DPS and healer combinations, though there are a few exceptions, but it does make it pretty powerful. Your job in this comp as Sigma is threefold. Use your barrier to stop damage when Orisa's is down, use your barrier to stop important enemy cooldowns, and your final and maybe most important task is protecting your backline, either with accretion, raw damage, your shield, or whatever you have available. I mean, all of that is pretty simple, so I'm not going to go into too much of that. Just know that this is your team's win condition. The other big thing in this composition that I need to talk about is the Halt Rock combo. Much like the Halt Hook or Pulled Pork, this is fairly easy to execute and can result in a kill most times. Depending on your distance to the Orisa, this can be hard to pull off, but in general, when you see the Halt go out, do a quick 1 to 2 count and then throw your accretion or rock out. It takes some practice, but once you get it, it can make night and day difference in this composition's success rate. Alright, let's talk about the other tanks real quick. I'm going to quickly go over some tips for them. Nothing in depth, but at least you'll know how to complement them if the need arises. Reinhardt. Play like you would with Orisa, just know your barrier is going to take a lot more beating as Reinhardt's is going to need to recharge more often. You should also always be pushing forward into the enemy. This is definitely not a holding ground type of composition. Hammond. Defend your backline with your barrier and take advantage of his ground slam as it makes hitting your primary fire much easier. Also look to combo Gravitic Flux with mines. Lifting a team and then dropping them onto a full group of mines is a quick fight win, if you can pull it off, but it will require some practice. Winston, the Scientist. Okay, look, he's not the best combo with Sigma, but if you are forced to play it, the best way I found is make use of your barrier to shield Winston while he's jumping in so he can spend more time in there harassing and doing damage, and then let him use his barrier when he jumps out. You'll also be on backline defense again, so what I said with Hammond also holds true with Winston. Diva. Playing Sigma like Ryan here will serve you really well. Pushing forward into the enemy team so Diva can contest high ground or touch the point when defending, depending on offense or defense. Sigma's ult also pairs really well with self-destruct. Cast Sigma's ult first and then throw in the self-destruct for a lot of guaranteed kills. Roadhog. Rock Hook or Hook Rock combos are guaranteed kills, so focus on getting picks with this comp. You're going to lose a ground war, and verticality is not your strong suit. So play around Hog's cooldowns, and you should have enough damage to secure kills rather quickly. Also, be sure to look to use your shield to block strong cooldowns, not keeping it out too long here. As it's the only shield, it will get destroyed rather quickly, so look to play around map geometry rather than your barrier. Finally, Zarya. Play this as a high damage Reinhardt, pushing forward with bubble and using your shield when bubble's down. Keeping the Zarya's energy high is your win condition here. Communication is also key. Let Zarya know when you're about to use your absorb and when your barrier's down. Also, spreading out your ultimates is key, as Grav and Gravitic Flux used together in most cases is a waste. Finally today, let's talk about some individual matchups and how you can come out on top. As I mentioned earlier, Symmetra, Mei, Doomfist, and Sombra will be the bane of your existence while playing Sigma. So here's some tips for each of those to at least get you through the experience. First up, Symmetra. And while she's getting some nerfs on the PTR, I think mentioning her here is still important. Keep an eye on her positioning. Put your barrier up in a position that has to force her to get aggressive to get charge off of it. Once she does, take your barrier down immediately so she can't gain that charge, and use the rock primary fire combo to take her out. If she gets full charge, you're most likely already dead. May. May is a tough one, okay? So, remember how I mentioned shield dancing earlier? That's really the only way you can deal with a May when she gets up close, if you're dueling her one-on-one. If she does get close, try to hit her with the rock. Most times this will either land and you can do some follow-up damage, or at least force out ice block. This will make the 1v1 much easier. You can also eat May's ultimate if she telegraphs it, but as I mentioned earlier, you're probably better off saving this unless you're really sure she's going to throw it out. On to Doomfist, everybody's favorite hero at the moment. This one is hard, as it comes down to basically how well the Doomfist lands his abilities. If you can dodge the rocket punch, you can pretty much beat him. If you see him charging his punch, throw the rock at him. This will stop him, and then you can delete him, or at very least force him away. If he slams and then uppercut combos you while you are in the air, use Absorb to stop the incoming primary fire damage. You should have enough shield to at least go toe to toe with him and force him out. But like I said, this is a tough matchup. If he gets the drop on you, there's really not much you can do on your own. And finally, Sombra. When you hear the hack noise, turn around and use your shield to cancel it, not your primary fire, as most people's instincts would tell them. The shield is faster and more reliable. Also, keep an eye out, as one primary fire direct hit is enough to generally force most Sombras out. So Sigma is good at Sombra checking due to his no reloading. And while we could go into what DPS and healers you play well with, right now I think you should be a little less concerned with that and a little more about practicing your individual skill. So I think that should pretty much do it for us today. Keep in mind, Sigma does have a high skill cap, but he also has a very high reward for a tank. So, I think that kind of evens it out without being broken. Know your counters and how you can play around them, and how to basically let your team know how they can help you. And Sigma can fit into most team comps. And like all new hero releases, my best advice, above everything else I've said today, is pretty much just go out there and play him. It's the best way to get his kit timing down, his positioning, and everything. It's just going to take a little bit of practice. So, what are you doing still watching the video? Get out there and crush some bones.